Hi, AfterBuzzers. You're watching the Black Mirror After Show, so stay tuned.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AfterBuzz TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
It's everyone's favorite song. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Black Mirror Season 3, Episode 5 episode of the AfterBuzz show. I said that completely backwards. Titled Men Against Fire. I'm Adrian Snow. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Miss Adrian Snow. That's MSADRIANSNOW. And here are my fellow co-hosts.
I'm Miaira Jennings. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Miaira Jennings.
And I'm Steve Kaufmann. You can find me on Twitter at Steve Kaufmann. That's KAUFMANN.
All right, so again, we are reviewing Season 5 episode, Men Against Fire. First thoughts?
It was good. I felt like this one was very politically driven. A lot of references to media and things, but I don't know if I would say this one is on my favorite list. Just right off the bat. I enjoyed it, but
there's so few episodes that they're all kind of on my favorite list. But this one I enjoy a lot because I'm very much like questiony in my life. Just like straight down to being a Gemini, where it's just like, nope, everything, you can question anything ever.
You're a Gemini.
So yeah. So the idea of anything that seems authoritarian, I immediately question it. And this episode just hit me in all those places.
It was I guess maybe I'm incredibly desensitized because every other Black Mirror show, I'm kind of like, okay, so he has to have sex with a pig, But this episode, I was like, oh, what a gut punch. Like,
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because I guess I kind of see how that is mirrored in real life.
Yeah.
And how that's kind of, my brother is a soldier, or was a soldier. And so you kind of, I am aware of like, the person you see at the beginning when they go into being in the army versus the person that comes out is a very different person sometimes. And so that kind of mindset of like how we train people to be able to go into combat and how they toy with it in this episode was very intriguing to me.
Yeah.
So we start the episode with Stripe and his platoon? His squad. There we go. His squad, and they're all getting ready to go out to kill some roaches. Which I was like, oh, okay, is this the alien episode? Or they're like,
I was thinking monster creatures.
It must be like some
robots,
crazy aliens that come down and they look kind of like bugs, like that movie from the 90s. So, because I was like, I assume like this is what they're talking about. They must be talking about actual pest-like creatures.
Some type of lowest common denominator thing.
And I assumed, and kudos to the writers of this episode for having my brain immediately go to that by calling these things roaches. And he's paired with Ray, who is so just like that person you meet that is like, yeah, America, crush my Budweiser.
Ultimate patriot.
I'm going to go kill some roaches. And you're kind of like, ooh, okay, you're just maybe a little too much. And Medina, who is his commander. And they're all going out. And they end up going to a village. And this is where I was kind of like, okay, so they're American, but the village is obviously, they were Dutch or Danish. They were speaking European. My parentheses said something about they're speaking Dutch or they're speaking Danish or something. Or is that right? Yeah. And so I was like, okay, so this is kind of like circa 1984 type world where Americans are handling European business. Okay. So they say that the roaches have come in and they like went through their food and now nobody's going to touch it. I was like, okay, so these roaches must be like humanoid if they can, maybe they can contaminate things, but they're also humanoid if they can go in and like pilfer through things and leave stuff behind. They're not just like destroying stuff and they're not just killing people. So they have to be, okay, maybe like District 9 type of deal. Like, I'm still like, these things are aliens, right? And so we end up finally being, the roaches are revealed by they're being fostered by a man. And this is when I was kind of like, okay, something's up. Because this feels very similar to how during the Holocaust, people would foster
Absolutely.
Jewish people to protect them from the Nazis.
Also, Mr. Burke's in our chat, and I'll give everyone a shout out on our chat in the next episode. Roaches was a clear terminology used in Hotel Rwanda for undesirables.
Oh,
They literally
wow.
used
Thank
the
you
word
for that
roaches. Yeah.
reference.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I did not know that reference. So thank you for that.
That it was very clearly of just how can something authoritative label an entire group of people undesirable and unnecessary.
We're not supposed to talk about the people yet.
I'm talking about the terminology as it exists in Hotel Rwanda.
No, I get it. Everyone,
Yeah.
if you're watching the AfterBuzz show, you've obviously watched the episode, but I like to act like people didn't. So in any case, so we're at this point we know something's up. So how did you guys feel at the point where we get introduced to the roaches?
This is definitely when I was sensing, okay, this may not be what I'm thinking, because if some person is alive and well housing these things, then they must not be any kind of monster or creature. So thinking, this is going to have some kind of political
Underbelly.
yeah, something like that. So I was excited for the reveal at that point.
There was definitely a lack of information, but where most people take a lack of information as, well, no, it's clearly the narrative that's there. I take it the other way of like, the lack of information is probably where the reason a human would be housing vampire things.
Yeah.
The lack of information is probably why.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when it's revealed that they're like vampire things, like straight up Nosferatu looking people, I still was kind of just like, oh, well then this can't be all there is to them.
Well, because if they're...
But this is how they obviously look, but is this like a mutation?
Because then it immediately, once again, there's more questions.
Yeah, it's
that
just
don't
like...
seem to be asked or answered, and like part of us assumed like, oh, well, that already, clearly going and killing them is the only way to stop it, like a zombie.
I didn't think that they should kill them. I was like, because there must be something up. They haven't harmed this man. It doesn't seem like, and that was something that went through my brain. I was like, they haven't harmed anyone. So why would you, they look like vampires, but I also kind of love vampire stories. So I'm kind of like, there must be something else going on. They're not attempting to kill anyone. Like, they're just attempting to run.
Yeah, that's
they
what I
haven't
was
attacked
thinking, too.
anyone. If they're really vampires, they'd be like, I'm going to suck your blood. And so that's kind of where I was like, well, okay, this is, you at least have me pulled in enough to be kind of curious. And then he does that, Stripe does the thing that I'm like, everyone in horror films, everyone in sci-fi films, television shows, I'm like, why do you pick up crap that you don't know anything about and then wave it in your face? Like, don't do this to yourself. Like, don't stick your hand in the pod in Alien and like be surprised when Alien bursts out and eats your face. Like, it's just that kind of thing of like, oh, why did he do this? Why? But
although it did, but it also played into all the questions I had of like, he picked up a thing that none of, like, this is the first time he didn't know what was happening.
Exactly.
And I think it played into the idea that if you give someone a choice to question, they will make the wrong choice.
Yeah.
Or they will make a choice that might not be,
maybe?
They might not make a safe choice. They might not make a beneficial choice as per the whole. Because he picks it up and hits the button.
Does he even hit the button? I think it was already on from when they attempted, because when you first
I'm not sure if he hit it.
They attempted to do it to him when he first found
Yeah,
him.
I think maybe they already hit the button, but he clearly picked it up and put it like right to his face.
Yeah, like an idiot, just like flash that sucker right. Into
And
his
initially, I thought it was like I'm more like, oh, well, that's convenient. Until I really thought about like, well, no, this is a person who's literally been told what everything is always.
Gotta make sure.
Hashtag gotta make sure.
It reminded me very much of just like District 9. So I automatically assumed it was like, oh, okay, well now he's going to become one of them. And if I just spoiled District 9 for you, I apologize, but it's been like 6 years. You should have seen it by now.
You're behind.
And you don't even have to watch the whole thing. There's a lot of CG in the middle of it where you're like, okay.
With District 9?
Yeah, well, we should.
I mean, I knew early on what had happened, but I still want to be like, oh my God, you did what I thought you were going to do. I'm smart. And so we end up going into watching Stripe kind of feel the I guess the effects of this light being shined in his face. I'm just waiting for those fangs to come out. Like that whole time I'm like, okay, the fangs are going to come out and that kind of stuff. But because he killed 2 roaches on his first outing, he gets a sex dream.
Isn't that an interesting incentive?
Like, wow, okay. So, but did you notice as well, like, well, actually, I'll jump to that a little bit later. But he wakes up from the dream because he's having flashes of something else, like he's like screams or something, and he's a little bit confused. And when he wakes up, we see that everyone is kind of. Wait, did I skip? I did skip. Let's take it back.
But he had a sex dream.
He had a sex dream, which is like your kind of gift for killing roaches. And so after he's in training, Medina, his commander, notices something wrong with him and sends him to therapist, aka I can't remember his name from House of Cards, but we'll call him Michael Kelly from House of Cards, aka Arquette in this episode. And he explains to him that, you know, the way that he was phrasing
but they also checked his ARI.
Yeah, so they checked his mass, which is the technology that's used that we discovered later. Like we already kind of know about it because it allows them to see holographic images when they're planning their infiltrations. But what I found to be really fascinating was how he's focused on like deciphering his feelings. Because then it made me think like, oh, okay, well they're not supposed to feel anything, and that was kind of that first clue for me.
I was kind of thinking it was some kind of PTSD type thing because, like you said, I definitely picked up that he was focusing on his emotions and his how did you feel after that and things of that nature. But I still didn't think anything maybe happened. Maybe he was reacting to killing these things and something was wrong. So I'm not sure how I digested that at that point, but it was interesting.
I knew it was. They made it pretty clear that the tech went wrong because of the one thing he didn't tell them about and they didn't know about.
He did tell them about it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
so I thought it was fine.
But he couldn't explain.
Yeah,
he couldn't actually explain that it was.
And they were very dismissive of it too.
Like, oh, well, that's just some stuff.
So all you're dismissive of.
Well, because if you have absolute control and you think you have absolute control, you're going to be dismissive of. No, we would have caught that in our diagnostic.
Exactly.
In our big supercomputer machine thing.
And there's some, and the roaches are not smart enough to do anything.
Of course not. Because everyone's devaluing an entire class of roaches.
So he has another sex dream, which kind of spirals out of control. At least
he's a broken sex dream.
He's a broken sex dream, which is just like, oh, okay, oh no, too many women.
Because but it was an intimate sex dream, and then there were like 9 clones of the women, which would be confusing. Whereas if it were
to some,
but if it were not an intimate sex dream, where it was the kind of fantasy you'd have where there are 9 women, I could see that going fine. It was clearly a malfunction.
I mean, it was like
they were mixing genres.
A dream. Which isn't that kind of what like happens in dreams? Like even I guess because maybe because it's a mass control dream, so they're used to having a certain type of control in the dream. But dreams like spiral out of control all the time. All of a sudden you're like, oh my god, what is happening? Now I have to run for my life from zombies. I was having sex. like that's kind of how dreams go. But he wakes up, and that's what I wanted to talk about. So when he wakes up, everyone's dreaming. But they're all having mass control dreams. And you see them moving their hands, like the guy moves his hand, and everyone, the one with the first one that Robert Downey Jr. is making the movie.
The entire history of you.
The entire history of you.
Where they essentially have that
the memories
controller. Yeah. They have that controller in their hand.
If we're going to talk about timelines, and this comes after that timeline.
I would argue this comes before.
Why?
Only because it's military tech.
But
you develop it in the military first before you.
That's right.
My theory would be because that's where the money is. The money's where military is, and the money in tech historically comes from war.
And that was actually on a news headline on the on Hated in the Nation, which is clearly I guess that was
way before this. Yeah,
that mass is developed.
With the
military. Because I think like the remote thing would be something that would go away. Like I feel like if nothing else,
I interpreted it as triggers, as literal trigger fingers.
Oh, because
the actual control, they didn't actually have controllers. The controllers, their commanders had the controllers. They didn't have the controllers.
That's what I mean, though. So if nothing else, that these are the entire history of you is at least running along the same timeline as mass, because it would make sense if it's for both, but in the military, you don't have the control.
Yeah, and then in the consumer grade version
would have the remote where you could actually
the
control.
timeline would probably be very rapid if it worked in the military.
Yeah.
Well, if it worked on whoever you tested, which
Yeah.
if we're talking timeline would have been
Yeah.
undesirable people in the universe. You would have tested on undesirable people before you tested on the military, before you offered it up to consumers.
Yeah. Well, that's just like a little theory that I noticed of like it wasn't just like a finger. It was an actual like remote type of movement that reminded me of that. And I did read an article where they were like, yeah, that's a thing. But okay, where are we? Okay, so the next day they discover that there's some roaches like in an abandoned community, and they decide to go after them. And Ray, per usual, is kind of just like super hyped about life, killing roaches. And what we discover, one, Medina is shot. So we learn that they are able to handle a gun and shoot people. Okay, that's interesting. Like, this is just what's going on.
And they all
here.
seem kind of shocked by it too.
Yeah.
But they look up and like, the roach has a gun, like monkey
how
driving car?
How
What?
can they shoot this gun? Like,
Yeah.
they can't even speak. And so they go in to attack them, and Stripe is still having some issues with it. And I think the coolest thing for me was watching the one guy who has like the vampire face, and then the next cut he doesn't have the vampire face, and I was like, wait a second. I was like, I'm super confused. That guy was a vampire, right? Why is he not a vampire anymore? And that's when you realize that the actual technology is forcing them to believe that the people are vampires when they're just normal people.
Or
Not it. But they,
if you were one of the people like myself who watches something and then has their own opinion and then it takes so much for a twist to really change you. Example, me, Beautiful Mind. Remember that scene in Beautiful Mind where he realizes that it's all made up in his head? And then he has and then he moves on taking pills, and then he stops taking pills, and then he has a relapse. And it's like, actually, we're the CIA. I went with the CIA. I was like, no.
So you
so
thought,
you thought he had
that
the
So
CIA.
I thought that they were still vampires, but they were using some type of trick with that
change
tech
him.
to change his AR to think that they aren't vampires.
that would have been interesting
Because
too.
I'm rewatching it now, going through it now with the theme of control.
Yeah.
That makes no sense to me. But when I was watching it on a first glance, I was like, oh well, the
That's
baddies.
definitely understandable. Yeah.
The
can see
baddies,
that.
our main character can't possibly be one of the baddies. That would be weird. The baddies found a way to mess with his eyes to make him think that
this
they're
is
not
very
vampires.
telling of our personality.
It is.
I'm like, the government's trying to kill all of us. I'm like, trust no one.
That's me too, but on a first viewing, I'm initially trusting.
Oh, yeah. Those days are over for me. No, yeah. The moment his face changed, I was like, oh my God, that's really effed up. I completely understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're, to convince these soldiers to kill people, they're changing their faces. And I only believe that more so because I just didn't think that light had that much power to really get their faces to change to look normal. And then so, and also we get introduced to like children in this moment, and I was like, there's just
That was the most powerful moment for me, for
Yeah.
sure. When we see the big reveal, and it was like just these regular people and
Yeah.
children running for their lives.
yeah, and the fact that there were so many issues where they weren't attacking, they were running. The only time a roach attacked was when they shot Medina because they were afraid for their lives and for their children. So at that point, when Stripe turns on Ray and he takes off with them, I was like, well, he's gonna die. And he's going to die knowing the truth, and then that's the moral of the story. But of course, it's Black Mirror, and they're like, no, we can go darker and worse than that. And Ray doesn't realize, she comes in, she kills the wife and child, or mother and child, which is so sad. Doesn't realize it, and Arquette, a.k.a. Michael Kelly, a.k.a. House of Cards, comes through and explains to Stripe what the deal is. And the deal is that they discovered that they couldn't have the perfect army because humans have too much empathy. And that is like the flaw.
The major flaw of humanity.
Is that we have empathy.
Which is
universe
just
is this?
ridiculous. Also, timeline-wise, we can place this well before Be Right Back. Because if the tech in Be Right Back, where they can literally create a human
Yeah.
that'll do whatever computer tells it to,
Yeah.
then those people would be those would be the soldiers, not actual soldiers.
And we're getting there.
Yeah.
AKA Terminator.
Yep.
AKA. They will take over. It's fine. I'll be dead by the time that happens. I feel bad for my grandchildren. But
Man.
that's dark. Well, Black Mirror. So we discover that the mask not only creates the visuals of the roaches.
It augments the reality,
augmented reality
completely.
Which is kind of a futuristic version or a more advanced version of what we saw in playtest of like being able to augment reality, because it's an implant as well. But that also, it prevents you from having other senses. So like they never smell anything. They never, which explains why they're able to kill so easily, because you can't smell like the blood or like people crapping themselves out of fear. And so our cat basically says, we need you to forget about all of this conversation, the fact that you even realize that what we're doing is like horrific and horrible. And that there is kind of like this kind of eugenics elitism that the entire world has agreed to, based on nothing else but really power. Because even when he's talking to Katarina, the roach, she says, yeah, they tell you that we're sick and that we're diseased, but we're just people. Like we don't have any of the things that they say that we do. And that's something that I was like, well, then why do that? Is it just really a power play? Is it just to keep some type of 1984, like we keep these people in check by enforcing that these people are bad?
Well, the argument would be that the military has always done that, all the way down to its initial training.
Well, right, yeah, brainwashing people and getting them to think a certain way.
And then, like, if you were to ever do a military grade, like shootout, like, you would get the most points for how quickly you shoot the target.
Yeah.
It doesn't. The military does not want you to reason over what is or isn't a target. Or
well, I'm actually just speaking in terms of this particular universe, because there's not really like a actual. They don't reference like some type of other world nation craziness happening where we're at war with people.
Well, we're left to assume that this is a privatized army, but American, because they have a symbol on their back and there's a company. So they're not the U.S. Army; they're a privatized army.
And of course, Americans would be the one that
would totally do that.
That's fair. I can't knock that. But no, it seems almost kind of like a. Have you guys read 1984? Have you read 1984? No. It's ancient by now, but there is that kind of reference of just like there's a continuous war to keep people in line. That there is no actual war going on, but the propaganda is being constantly told to us that there is war, and that people who are of a certain class are basically taken in and corrupted or destroyed or murdered for being unwanted, for being undesirables. And so that's what I was kind of questioning. Like, is it, and regardless of like how we do train the military, and that Men Against Fire is an actual reference to a book talking about World War II.
I say that this is an evolution of what the military has always been doing.
Okay. So is this a class issue in this episode or what?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was thinking even if the people that were augmented in their physical appearances were sick of some sort or had some kind of diseases, would that still be justified to take them out of our race? Because I feel like we've been kind of toying with that technology already.
The argument would be it wouldn't be justified to completely augment the reality of the soldiers that are actually doing the killing from what the context is. Because for better or worse, like if someone goes to Afghanistan right now, they can get multiple news sources of what's actually happening in Afghanistan. Whereas the argument in this episode is that they've been completely brainwashed technologically to think that they're literally fighting boogeymen.
But I'm saying even when the doctor, whatever, the therapist was talking, was talking to Stripe. He was explaining to him, these people, they're ruining our race. Like, do you really want that for future generations? It's in their DNA. And I'm thinking we are already toying with this this technology and this science that can have people choose attributes for their children and get rid of autism and things of that nature. But is that still justified in the eyes of the government.
Yes.
In this world.
Yeah. I mean, I think eugenics is something that people have been toying with far longer than before, well before the Holocaust. It's something that the human race has a fascination with. Like, how can we be the best of versions of ourselves? And the people who aren't the best version of ourselves, how can we get rid of them? And you see it across the board for class and race. And in particular in this world, it is about class. I mean, if you think about how, I know we always talk about in regards to third world countries, and I think America's the only place that says third world countries, but
We are.
we are the only nation that does that. But how we view homeless people. Like, from childhood, I was taught, and my parents still get on me to this day, and they make reference to it, that I should not engage with homeless people. That I should fear homeless people. Because what if they attempt to rob you? What if they attempt to take things from you, and they're diseased, and you don't know where they've been? And I never understood that, because I was like, but they're people, and they need help.
Yeah.
But that's something that we do every day, where, especially in places like LA, where there is a very big homeless population, you're taught, society teaches you through implicit bias to ignore these people, to not give them money, to not help them, and to see them in some way as less than human. So that's, if we were to take that to a larger scale, then that would be something enforced by the
That's
army.
very
you know?
true.
And it's there's a lot of mirror to what
Yeah.
we're into right now. It's also for me I was always with homeless, because I'm from Philadelphia and I live here now, so like I'm very familiar with. I've had parents who pretty much like, if you engage them and they're humans and you want to help them, here's what it'll take to help them. And then they describe a 3 to 5 week process of helping someone, and then that person has to willingly be helped. And part of that would mean they'd have to fall in line with your societal norms and want to fall in line with your societal norms. And it would be a bit like that, at least a more pragmatic approach to that problem that these soldiers are not getting.
Yeah.
These
Why-
soldiers are getting,
Yeah.
nope, it's a boogeyman.
Yeah.
But why do you think they deliberately chose class as the issue that was segregating these people?
I think because
as
that's-
opposed to like a different aspect of
the bigger thing
humanity.
that I think we don't talk about a lot of the time. It's very easy for us to talk about things in regards to race and gender, because they are things that visually separate us, and so it's easiest. It's just the easiest choice. But when you think about it, across the thing that would unite everyone is just the understanding that, like,
money.
we're all suffering in some way.
Yeah.
That if you aren't at a certain level and in a certain way, then you are in terms suffering, and that you could have a better life overall. Like, we could all have a better life. Now, what would that take? That would all take us having an agreement to basically throw away society as we see it now, and a certain level of power of understanding that the people who are the puppeteers of our society have, in a sense, brainwashed us to agree with how we operate in the world now. And most people just, like, don't have the education to have that realization a lot of the time, because we do keep people at a certain level of...
Or that there's an incredible, like, and I like that all of these characters are American.
Yeah.
That, like, class exists in other societies where it's noted that, like, this person's lower class, higher class, middle class. Whereas class exists in America and we never talk about it.
We never talk about it.
That's actually a pretty good point.
The first thing we want to talk about in America is race or gender. It's the first thing we jump to, or sexuality. And when you, in any way, have been, like, thrust out on the outside, like, I received discrimination not because necessarily of my race, of my race, but by my race as a child. So I was kind of thrust into the outside. And you can see the world differently when you don't receive discrimination in the standard way. And then you realize there's a much bigger problem than just the color of my skin or the fact that I was born with a vagina. And so there's bigger things that we just don't acknowledge, especially in America, that in other countries they do acknowledge, but we just are the bullies of the world and we have the loudest voice. Please do not send me bad YouTube comments because I said that.
But if you do, in civilized discussion, send proof that she's wrong.
Exactly.
That's great. I'm actually glad you guys shared that, because that's a great reason to choose class as the factor in this episode.
And if you really think about it, like, it's class and also power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Power and class, because people talk a lot about America being a plutocracy versus an oligarchy. Whereas I may get them confused, and please let me know in the comments. An oligarchy is where the rich run the place, whereas a plutocracy is where a small group of powerful run the place. And America is that one.
Yeah.
That you don't necessarily have to be rich to run everything in America, because power runs on a different sphere than wealth.
And then also, just to wrap it up, the last thing I wanted to note was that how all the soldiers were people who, in our modern society, are considered undesirables.
Yes.
Black men and women.
Well, before you could send them to a San Junipero prison.
Yes.
A San Junipero class prison.
I just thought that was a really interesting commentary, that the people who were enforced to take down other people were people who in modern day society are considered in some way to be less than. So I thought that was a very interesting commentary on that as well. And final thoughts before we wrap up?
No.
Really like this episode.
Yeah, it's a
I
great
like this
episode.
episode way better than Playtest, which people
I agree with that.
people compare these a lot because the tech and the ideas are similar.
It's a very political heavy episode. If in any way you were offended, the opinions here on AfterBuzz TV are solely those of the host. Okay, all right. So I think that about wraps it up for this episode. I'm Adrian Snow. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Miss Adrian Snow. And where can they follow you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Miaira Jennings.
And you guys can find me on Twitter at Steve Kaufmann. That's Kaufmann.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.